Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin With ReefBum. I'm your host, Keith Berkelhamer, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Matt Ferroni, who is the Husbandry Director and General Manager at TSM Aquatics in New Jersey. TSM operates a very large aquatic superstore with over 10,000 square feet of saltwater fish and coral. Hey, Matt, welcome to the show. Glad you could be with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So as we have in the past live streams, I encourage everybody to ask questions in the chat. We have Matt here, and it's going to be a great opportunity to pepper him with some fish questions. I know I've got a ton of questions, as per usual. But hey, Greg, what's happening? Got some of the viewers tuning in here. Great Bearded Reef, Paul. Thanks for joining us again. Marcel Rodriguez is here, but before we start chatting with Matt, I want to thank our new sponsor of the show, which is Marine Depot. And it does take a lot of work for me on my end to put the show together, a lot of time and effort. So I really appreciate Marine Depot being a supporter of the show. And I also want to thank all of you folks who have been tuning in week after week, and especially those who have been supporting me via the Super Chat. Very much appreciated. So anyway, now that we've taken care of some business, Matt, let's talk some reef and some fish tank stuff here. So I always ask my guests when I start off the show how they got into the hobby or the business. So Matt, what's your story? How did you kind of get started with all of this stuff?
I've been an animal lover since I was a kid. I've had snakes and turtles and frogs, all kinds of reptiles, freshwater fish. Got into saltwater when I was probably entirely too young to have saltwater. It was a bit of a debacle. Got back into it for a bit in high school, and then off to college I went. After I graduated college in 2007, I took a job at Adventure Aquarium, which is a local aquarium in New Jersey. I was there in the water quality lab as I started for about a year, and then kind of made my way up. Spent 11 years there and ended my career at the aquarium as an assistant curator. And then I came over to TSM full time about 2 years ago.
So just talk to us, Matt, in terms of your role at TSM. You're the general manager and the husbandry director. What does that all entail?
Tom, it's basically just overseeing the day-to-day operation. We're a very small staff. There's about 5 of us here, all of whom are biologists. And then we all assume different roles throughout the day. So anything from ordering the fish to, as far as the quarantine goes and setting the standards for our quarantines, adjusting protocols as needed, making any of those decisions. And then I'm doing sales and answering the phones and just about everything.
So I kind of happened upon you guys a few months ago. It's been interesting in terms of what's going on in the online fish world these days. When I first got into the hobby many years ago, I was doing a lot of my business with live aquaria, and I think a lot of other folks were doing that. They were doing a lot of WYSIWYG online every day, and they had a reputation in terms of selling high quality fish, and they had this great arrive guarantee, the 14-day guarantee. So it was very low risk for the customer, but they changed hands a number of times in terms of ownership, and they've been restructured, and I think they were just recently sold again or changed hands again. And but for the last few years it just hasn't been the same in terms of my experience with live aquaria. I can't speak for others out there, and I've always been kind of hunting around for a reputable online retailer, and I kind of read some really good feedback from you guys on Reef to Reef, I think it was. So I gave you a shot, and I placed an order a couple of months ago, and it was awesome. I mean, the fish that I got in that order arrived really healthy and seemed very hardy. And unfortunately, I had a major accident with my tank about 6 weeks ago. I had an overdose of ammonium nitrate into the sump. just spilled into the sump. Back siphon, I made a mistake, and I had the dosing container too high off the floor, and so it back siphoned in. It killed 9 of the 21 fish, but none of the fish that I got from you guys perished. So
well, good. To the bullet, you can't kill them.
So, you know, I thought it was going to be, I thought it'd be very interesting to have you on the show, because I think what attracted me to you guys was the quarantining that you guys do. Can you kind of explain to folks what you do in terms of the quarantine? And then after that, I think what we're going to do is we're going to show a video that you shot of TSM, so folks can kind of get a better idea of what the layout is all about there. But yeah, can you kind of get into the whole quarantining process that you guys do and how you kind of stand out from others out there?
Sure, and I would agree with you on, you know, on some of the other online vendors, having purchased from a lot of them as a hobbyist and seeing over the years the change, for better or worse. So we definitely recognize that there was space in the market for a higher quality product. And ideally, we're trying to improve the hobby by having hobbyists start off on the right foot. And getting healthy livestock right off the bat is certainly the best way to do that. So our standard quarantine, basically when the fish come in, we acclimate them to the system. We'll do a 200 ppm formalin bath on them for 45 minutes to an hour. Nothing we do initially is designed to really eradicate anything. More or less, we're just trying to knock down the parasite loads. To make them a little bit more manageable, just given the fact that, you know, one of these parasites can turn into 100 or thousands really very quickly. So the formalin bath addresses some parasites. We follow that up with a freshwater dip, again to try to, you know, knock some stuff off, give them another rinse before they get moved into their actual quarantine system. And then we get pretty aggressive with our treatment pretty early on. We'll start ramping up copper within about 24 hours of the fish arriving. And we'll also do our first dose of praziquantel. So we'll run copper for a minimum of 30 days. In general, most of these fish tend to stay in quarantine for 35, maybe even 40 days. And they're getting 3 rounds of praziquantel while they're over there. And we do our prazi at 2.5 ppm. We do that once a week for 3 weeks. Now that's the standard quarantine. Of course, other stuff can potentially pop up, and plenty of our customers can attest to the fact that if something came up outside of the normal quarantine and there was going to be an extension, you know, they were notified, hey, this is what we're dealing with. We need to hang on to these fish a little bit more until we, you know, get the situation worked out. We also do a series of medicated foods. We'll do metronidazole. And we'll do Panicure as well to help, you know, eradicate any intestinal parasites. Again, that's a little bit more foolproof, or a little less foolproof rather. It's hard to monitor, you know, short of getting fecal samples from every fish to know that you've completely eliminated anything. Obviously, if we're seeing if the fish is losing body mass, we're not putting body mass on. Certainly indications that something may be going on internally. But we really are trying to do as much as we can on this end to reduce any risk that the customer is going to get a fish that's not going to thrive for them. Now, that being said, no quarantine is 100%. There's always a chance that something's going to slip through. And I get that question a lot from customers. So if I buy fish from you, do I have to quarantine them? And I tell them there should really be no need to do any additional medication on these fish. The last thing I would want to see is fish come from us having just been in copper for 30 days and then get subjected to another round just because. So I usually advocate, if you have a quarantine tank and you know it's sterile, there hasn't recently been another, you know, outbreak in that system where you've been treating anything, you know, fish in and observe them for a week or two. You know, you're essentially the last line of defense. So, you know, if that gives you the additional peace of mind, then that's great. But again, in general, I think the better majority of our customers just pop the fish right in their display tanks. Seems to have been working out just fine.
Do you have different lengths of quarantine or different types of quarantine depending on the fish, or you pretty much use a standard process for every fish that comes through the facility.
Yeah, it is. It is standard, regardless of the species. It is the same quarantine. There's a lot of different quarantines out there now, and tank transfer methods, and this treatment and that treatment. Um, this is a quarantine that I'm comfortable with. It's one that I've used in my professional career for the past decade. We're using testing equipment that I trust, that is accurate, good quality reagents. It's a copper that we blend in house, so there's quality control on that as well. Um, Really pretty pleased with the way our quarantine works. So for me, I'm less inclined to change something that's working. If it's not broken, don't fix it, more or less. Um, and that's not to say that the other types of quarantine are any more or less effective. Um, I kind of like, at least in our situation, to be able to keep these fish moving through the quarantine process in a predictable manner. We kind of have to stick to that. We don't have the luxury necessarily of waiting to observe these fish for 2 or 3 weeks to see what happens. Again, we're not quarantining one fish at a time. Some of these fish systems will have 150 fish in there. So we put a lot of fish at risk if we don't get ahead of the game.
Right.
So it's basically a standard quarantine. And like I said, if something obscure pops up, we address it however we need to. But you hear a lot. You can't treat wrasses with this copper. You can use this copper. You can't treat them at all. Hit them with chloroquine. Don't hit them with chloroquine. There's a lot of back and forth as far as that goes, which I think leads to some confusion with hobbyists too. I think a lot of that has to do with the ability to accurately even test, your copper levels. How much of this anecdotal stuff is because, potentially the copper level is too high. If we're, using a copper test where we're matching colors, I don't see color the same exact way you do, and it creates a lot of variables. That Anna checker has only been out for a couple of years, but it's nice to finally have a hobbyist level, digital number to look at. To be able to keep track of your copper that way. So, we're super thorough with our testing. Every system gets tested daily. If we're doing a water change on that system, prior to the next edition of Prezi, it gets redosed for copper. It gets retested in the afternoon. If the copper level ever falls below a therapeutic level, we restart the clock. It's rare that happens. If it does, it usually happens very early on, because no quarantine is the same, even as far as the copper goes. Every system responds differently from one quarantine to the next. It could take a little bit longer to get the copper up to level. It could get absorbed or broken down by the bacteria in the system faster. So it's something we have to stay on top of. So we're testing 14 systems a day. That we blow through reagents.
I'd imagine it sounds like you guys have a very, very comprehensive quarantining process, and I'd imagine that is it's probably not cheap in terms of bringing in fish and then having them at the facility for that long of a time. Not being able to turn them around to realize revenue on the fish that you're bringing in. So can I assume that that's why a lot of other vendors out there might not be doing as comprehensive a quarantine process because it's a costly process?
Oh, absolutely. We probably spend $1,000 a month on reagents alone. Probably another 1,000 in food. It's might as well charge the fish rent while they're here. And again, it's not just the medicated quarantine that we're doing. It's these fish are being conditioned for the entire time that they're here. We're not sending any fish out if they're not accepting prepared foods. We'd rather lose them here than ship them to a customer and have them have issues, with these fish.
So Mike Johnson is asking a question, and I kind of had a similar question. His question is, how does the order process with TSM work? Are you ordering a specimen up front or just buying ones already out of QT?
So we have if you go on the website, you'll see there's a category for fish that are available now. And what that ends up being are fish that haven't sold out through the pre-order process. There's another tab on that website that it's pre-order fish, and basically what that means, if it's listed as pre-order, those fish are currently in the building, they are in quarantine, and then we give you the projected end date for that quarantine period, and then we'll set up shipping afterwards. And you can, if you place your order, you can continue to add to the order. You can buy fish that are available now, buy fish that are in quarantine, have them all shipped out together. Makes it a little bit more cost effective that way as well. If there's something you're looking for that you don't see on the website, you can always call us or shoot us an email. If it's something that we can feasibly get, we will. There are certain species we don't get, we don't see. We're not going to string you along trying to get something that we're fairly certain we're not going to be able to get a hold of. But I mean, we're pretty easy to work with in that respect.
Do you guys try to stay away from fish that are really expert only, very, very difficult to keep? Are there certain species of fish, that just do not do well in home aquariums?
I mean, there are plenty of things that don't do well in home aquariums, or you really don't have any business being there. For a lot of times it's just size related issues. You're buying a little 2-inch, 3-inch naso tank. At the time you got a 40-gallon tank, and that seems okay. And if you've got, you don't have the ability to rehome the fish, you have, no plans to upgrade the size of your tank. And it's all things to keep take into consideration. What these animals are going to need in the long term. I don't know if I answered your question. Just started rambling there.
John Reef from Vermont. Hey, thanks, man. Really appreciate the super chat. And this comment is, thanks for bringing TSM Aquatics aboard. He said that he is. I'm your biggest advocate in Vermont. I'm right up there, John. I'm a big advocate of these guys. But yeah. Thanks for the super chat. He's says only good things about you guys. And the Herm 14 made a comment. I think we already covered this. Does a medicated quarantine differ with the type of fish, say surgeon tangs from angels, or is it all the same? And I think you pretty much answered that question. It's all the same, right?
Yeah, and as far as back to your previous question that I just talked over, no, I mean we really give a go at just about anything. There are certainly fish that give us a run for our money with the quarantines. And a lot of these fish that are considered expert only on other websites also tend to avoid any guarantees that those other websites might offer on any of their other fish. So if you're buying a fish from us, whether it's expert only or not, I mean you're guaranteed to be getting a very healthy specimen.
All right, I promised we would roll the clip that you shot for us, Matt. So let's take a look at the tour of TSM Aquatics. Your dime tour here. It's about 4 minutes long, and then once we're done with that, we'll come back and talk some more. So I'm gonna roll that tape.
So we'll start in our water quality area. It's pretty straightforward. pH meter, do some titrations to test for alkalinities, calciums, magnesiums, and of course we do our daily copper testing on all of our systems to make sure that we're maintaining minimum therapeutic levels. We'll head out here to quarantine. Quarantine is actually pretty empty at the moment, which is good. It means we've got more fish coming, and I imagine by the end of this week we'll have about 500 more fish in the building, and we'll continue to bring them in over the next week or two until quarantine is full. It's a little glimpse of what we have at the moment. So there's 14 individual quarantine systems, each totaling about 350 gallons on average. Different configurations, a lot of 8-inch cubes, some 12-inch cubes mixed in for some of the bigger fish. We've got our coral system in the middle of the building, 2 800-gallon raceway systems, and then that smaller frag system in the middle. And then we'll move over to the sales system here. Once everything finishes quarantine, the fish will reside here until they are shipped out. This system's about 6,000 gallons. We left ourselves a little bit of room to expand. If you see any bags floating in the tanks, that's just water temperature acclimating. Those are fish that are going to be getting shipped out today. So we'll do a little bit of a stroll through and see if we spot anything that looks particularly nice. The majority of the fish in this system are actually sold. They're just awaiting ship out. Let's see what we got here. Some purple tangs, blue line cleaner wrasses, 4-line cleaner wrasses, some coal tangs. Here's a nice crosshatch trigger, another crosshatch trigger, koi tang, some lyre tail Anthias down there. A few more coal tangs here. Once these guys are gone, they are gone. It's a Personifer angel here. Got a brown. Large Red Sea sailfin tang. Regal angel. Moorish idol. Another Personifer here. It's a Japanese golden hawkfish. Yellow tangs. Some nice magnificent fox face. A couple banded angels. Bimacculatus Anthias and spot breast angel. Achilles. There's gem tang. Gray angel.
And we're back. Very cool. Thanks, Matt, for that tour. Guys are waiting on a lot of fish.
Yeah, we got, should be quite a few rolling in. We actually, one of those systems is already full from the time that, I shot the video this morning for you. So yeah, we'll start loading up pretty heavily again. There should be a lot of stuff popping on the website over the course of the next week or two. A lot of people have been itching for some new inventory. It's on its way. It's kind of the downside when we fill up all of quarantine at the same time. It's basically a month before new stuff starts showing up.
Well, I've got, let's see, I think I got a pair of flame hawks that are going to be coming in. Some of those lyre tail Anthias. And a couple of chromas to replace my deceased. And I know John Reef from Vermont says got a new order coming in a few weeks and can't wait. So
gonna have to be patient, John. We got a few more weeks to go.
So during the video, Matt, we were kind of talking about where you guys get your fish from, your suppliers. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the type of supplier that you use?
Yeah, so the majority of our shipments, there's really one U.S. wholesaler that we use primarily. They're one of the smaller ones. They do a lot of pre-quarantine or conditioning on their end before they even make their fish available. And that supplier works a lot with public aquariums as well. The quality of their product is really pretty apparent compared to some of the other larger loads that are out there. And after that, we're basically importing directly. It's nice to deal with the source, have fewer hands, on the fish, shorten the entire supply chain as far as that goes. We don't have to worry about fish fizzling out or wasting away for weeks at a time if they're not eating. But between the time that they're collected to the time they make it to the wholesaler to the time they're then shipped to us, shortening that entire chain seems to be most beneficial to the fish.
So Paul Graybeard of Reef is saying, and thank you, Paul, for asking folks to do this. We if you guys are digging what you're watching here, hit that like button because it will get recommended and more people will find the live stream. So hit that like button if you haven't done that already. Fragile Reefer is asking, does TSM deal only with wild collected fish and their disease, or is this the same process done to aquacultured fish? Is aquaculture less infected or just different diseases?
In general, it should be less infected, but it's not a guarantee depending on how they're being cultured and where. Are they in open water? Is it being done in a sterile environment? In any case, we still subject even our captive bred fish to our quarantine. And that's more or less for our own peace of mind, because eventually we have to clear that quarantine system out and we've got to move them into our sales system where everything else that has been treated is held. So we're not necessarily comfortable, risking, all of that other inventory on the basis that none of the captive bred fish are coming in with anything. And again, it should be very low risk, but we're not going to take a chance on it.
What are some things that folks can do to not stress out fish that they're purchasing from you folks? I mean, I always seems like the size of the tank is one thing that could really cause some stress with fish. So do you guys ever try to pass along advice in terms of having the appropriate size tank for the species of fish being purchased?
For sure, yeah. I mean, if customers, everyone seems to be pretty open to our feedback. There are certainly people who want what they want, and you can try to steer them one way or another. I would prefer to talk someone out of something that I didn't think was going to work with, the livestock they've got in their system, or it's not going to work for the size of their tank. I'll happily help them find something that may be comparable to what they were looking for. It's going to be a better long-term fit. But yeah, I don't push fish on people just to make a sale.
So we got a couple things going on in the chat. Hey, Paul, man, thank you so much. Great Bearded Reef for the super chat. Thanks for the great streams always. Thank you, Paul. So a couple of more comments and questions. That producer Reef, how do you guys go about cycling or keeping media cycled for fish?
Those systems they run constantly. Breaking a system down and sterilizing it is something that we can't do after every quarantine batch. We do have had a biofarm running, and that would get sites clean biological if you need it in a pinch. If you're having ammonia spikes for a system that's got a heavy bioload on it. But that's like another reason why we can't feasibly do a tank transfer method type of quarantine. We would need twice the amount of systems, that we currently run.
So another comment from Justin Carpeel. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly, Justin. And the question to Matt is, have you ever had an Ebola mimic tang? Saw one a few weeks back and fell in love. I'm not sure I've ever seen one of those.
We tend, if we get them, it'll be out of Sri Lanka. I do order them quite frequently. I don't get them very often. So certainly something that we're after.
Another comment here. Are they? So I'm just watching the comments here in terms of what Justin is saying. Do they have any? Are they aggressive fish towards other tangs, or are they just kind of like any other tang that you have to be careful about?
It's with any fish. I mean, they all got their own personalities. No two tangs, act exactly the same. You could have a model citizen, or you could have a complete terror, all within the same species. So, it's always a risk adding anything new to an established system.
So I got some questions for you, Matt, in terms of food,
Mhm.
and what would you recommend in terms of a good diet for any fish? Just kind of like a general food that folks should think about in terms of feeding their fish. I mean, I know tangs are herbivores, and so you should certainly think about feeding them, greens in their diet. But in general, what do you like in terms of fish food out there? What would you recommend?
So I think variety is important. And you get bored eating the same thing every day too. We feed on our end. We use a lot of Hikari products, Hikari mysis, Hikari spirulina, rich brine shrimp. We use PE calanus, PE mysis. We use a lot of the LRS products. We also use the New Life Spectrum pellets. We use TDO Chroma Boost pellets. Um, what else do we throw in there? We also use Missouri, which tends to cater to the public aquariums and zoos for their different lines of feeds. Basically comes as a dry powder. You add water to it, and it basically forms more or less of a hard gel. We can use a cheese grater and grate that up, and that's great for getting medications into fish versus just food soaks. We could also mix vitamin C into that product as well. So in addition to the vitamins that they're getting naturally in the food items we're providing, we are adding other vitamins and minerals to those mixes as well.
What about like homemade do-it-yourself food blends? I make my own fish food, and sometimes I'll feed it. I think I get sometimes I get a little cyano if I put too much of that stuff in there. But I'll go to the supermarket, I'll buy some cheap seafood. I've got a meat grinder, and I'll just put a bunch of scallops and shrimp and mussels and whatever other kind of cheap seafood I could find. But I think I've read that sometimes that stuff can kind of be heavy, or at least contain some iodine. Not sure if that's correct or not, but
I mean, it really depends. If you're using things like krill, they naturally have iodine in them. Um, you got to just be more careful of where you're sourcing this stuff. I mean, you never know what it's been exposed to. But again, you're not going to get a fresher product than if you're going to the market yourself and picking that stuff out. I don't really see any harm in it. And in public aquariums, you're basically buying restaurant grade seafood,
oh
uh,
really?
and that's what's being fed out to the fish. So again, the more variety, the better. The more nutrition you can get into these fish, the better. I mean, the better their diet, the healthier they are, the more resistant they're going to be. Even if you do have a parasite breakout of some sort, healthier fish will certainly fare better than one that's been struggling all along.
Yeah, I mean, I'll feed you know brine shrimp cubes, mysis shrimp cubes. I'll feed the pellets and some nori, and then maybe every once in a while I'll do the homemade food blend. But I try to like feed my fish 4 times a day. I mean, is there a number of times per day that you think is optimal in terms of feeding the fish?
I mean, four is a lot. Good for you. Good for you. I mean, as long as your system can get those nutrients out of there, by all means. A lot of these fish, I mean, in the wild, they're not eating one large meal unless it's a shark. It's not typically one large meal a day and that's it. They're eating small meals throughout the day. Anthias feed all day long. Um, tangs spend their day grazing. So, breaking, even if it's, the same amount of food, but broken up in multiple feeds throughout the day. I mean, different fish have, faster metabolisms. So again, they need to be fed more. And you could look at a fish and see, is it lacking body mass? And if so, feed it heavier. Um, is this fish obese? I mean, fish get hepatic lipidosis, fatty liver, basically. You can kill a fish just by overfeeding. Uh, so that's not great either. But in general, I mean, you can look at a fish and see if you're seeing its spine, you're seeing its ribs. Um, put some weight on it.
Yeah, my fish are pretty plump. What about feeding like garlic extract and things like Vitachem? Is that a good idea?
I mean, there's always stuff that comes out about garlic, that contradicts something that you had seen or read previously. Um, it can certainly entice some fish to eat. That's about all we would use it for on our end. We don't use it as a disease prevention. It can help mask the flavors of some of the medications, um, that we may be putting into food. So I mean, it could help just in that respect, making, enticing the fish to feed on these medications a little bit more. Um, but that's about all we do with garlic.
So there's a question from our sellers, and I'm not sure of the question. It's got to do with Velvet. He just had a or I'm assuming it's a he just had a purple tang dye of Velvet. It went from y'all's tank into a sterile QT tank. Have you ever had anything get through? I guess in terms of Velvet.
Not that we're aware of. I mean, we send out a whole lot of fish on a regular basis, and you'll get the one person every month who had an issue. But if no one else from any of those orders or quarantines had a similar issue, you kind of have to wonder where the problem lies. And again, all of the fish that end up leaving our quarantine end up in this non-medicated sales system. So if anything makes it through, it's going to pop up over there.
So, folks, I definitely want to encourage you to ask your questions in the chat. I still have a bunch of species specific questions that I'm gonna get into with Matt, but certainly put those questions in the chat. And yeah, if you have not hit that like button yet, please do so, and more people will find the live stream. So Matt, let's talk about tank raised fish, and I think the one species that really always I'm kind of infatuated with is clownfish. And there's just so many different varieties of clownfish out there these days that it's mind-boggling. What do you guys do in terms of clownfish? Do you have usually a lot of variety in terms of clownfish? Are you kind of like listening to what your customers are looking for in terms of clownfish?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So we certainly try to bring in kind of the regular, the standard stuff and a fair amount of stock on some other items that people seem to be after. If we start to get requests from customers looking for other stuff, we'll bring in those varieties too. I'm just not realistically going to bring in 200 varieties of fish. I don't want to have to sit on them, and feed them for months and months and months if they're not going to sell. But we certainly don't have any problem bringing stuff in, by request if it's available.
So if you wanted to get a pair of clownfish, is it necessary to buy a bonded pair, or will the likelihood be that if you have a single and you put another one with it of similar, variety, that they will eventually bond, or is that just not a given?
It could be a bit of a crapshoot. If you have the ability to buy a bonded pair, that's nice. Generally, when customers are looking for a pair or seeing if we'll get a bonded pair for them, we'll usually take the smallest clown in the group and toss it in with the largest clown in the group. It's more likely that smaller clown is still a male, the larger one may be a female. Let them go from there. Otherwise, I think the safest thing is really just to get two very young clowns and put them together. Inevitably, one will turn female.
It's interesting. I had a pair of clowns in one frag tank, and I had another pair of clowns in another frag tank, and my plan was to put them in my new 225 gallon Peninsula tank. So I did that about 2 weeks ago. I knew that there was a risk in terms of putting two different pairs of clownfish together in that tank, but I was hopeful that they would kind of work things out, so to speak. And a weird thing has happened. and that is that both pairs which bonded together in the individual frag tanks have kind of like intermingled.
Yeah.
And they're it's weird. I can't explain it, but one of them was three of them chased one of them around for one day, just one day, and knock on wood, they're all seemingly living in harmony right now. But the pairs are not paired up. They're just kind of like wandering around a little bit. Maybe at night they're paired up, but is there anything that somebody can do to kind of like optimize the chances that multiple pairs of clownfish will survive in a larger tank? I was trying to like get them to bond with some coral in the frag tanks.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it'll happen over time. You may find, two clowns prefer an anemone, two clowns prefer to swim in your Duncan coral all day long and really piss that off. You can't really, you can't force nature in that respect. But in terms of keeping multiple clowns together in the same system, the more space, the better. And again, captive bred clowns tend to do better, in groups. You're then throwing a bunch of wild caught clowns together. Maybe a little anecdotal, but one of the first exhibits I had at the public aquarium was a 600-gallon exhibit. It was all bubble tip anemones. And there were probably 30, 40, 50 different clownfish in there, ocellaires, perculas, saddles, sebagas, all kinds of stuff. And there was always, chasing here or there. They all had their territories. They had their anemone. They'd venture out to feed and then they'd go back. So spaces and territory, habitat's important.
Yeah, it's strange because I had a pair in my 187-gallon tank. Beautiful pair of Picasso Onyx. Is that how you pronounce that? O-N-Y?
Yeah.
Onyx. And so I lost one. I forgot what happened, but one of them didn't make it. So I had to add a second one to that tank, and just kind of kept my fingers crossed that they would bond. But these two clownfish pretty much stayed in opposite corners of the tank. They weren't like going at it or anything like that, but and they were similar size, but they were just not really interested in one another for about a year and a half. And then all of a sudden, I look in the corner of the tank, and they're actually over a clutch of eggs. They laid some eggs, and I was like shocked. And so then they started like hanging out together. I guess they hooked up. They started hanging out together, and at night they'll sleep in the same coral, which is a Goniopora.
Cool.
But during the day, they each host a different Goniopora. I can't figure it out, but it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's neat.
I don't know. I love clownfish. So let's talk about Anthias. I love Anthias, and I think they're probably one of the more beautiful fish out there. They're like a shoaling fish, and it's just very, very colorful. What would you say is the hardiest species of Anthias if you had to make a recommendation?
Yeah, I mean we tend to do pretty well with Anthias on our end. It's hard anymore to even say which ones are hardier than others. There's certain species for sure that are more challenging. Lyre tails, Dispar Anthias, Ignitus, those guys all seem to be really, really pretty hardy. Square spot Anthias are tanks. We do really well with our Bimaculatus Anthias. Again, as long as these guys are getting fed pretty heavily, it's not usually the diet that's an issue at that point. It's just aggression within that school.
How often would you recommend you feed Anthias? How many times a day, and what kind of food do they like the most?
Yeah, I would say at a bare minimum twice a day. If you do 3 times a day, it kind of goes back to the fact that in the wild they're eating a lot of smaller meals throughout the day. If they're getting 1 or 2 larger meals that happen to be highly nutritious or higher in calories. They may not need all of those additional feedings, but in general, it's a species that have faster metabolisms. You certainly want to offer them food a bit more frequently than you would necessarily your other fish.
Is it true that Anthias need a good amount of current? Do they do better in a tank that has good flow?
I mean, they tend to be found in some pretty high current areas. That's not to say that they won't do well in lower flow environments. But it's also nice to see them. They'll use that current, that incoming tide to feed. If you've got good wave action in your tank, and you pour your food right in front of your returns or your vortex, and you'll see them. They dart right into that current for the food, but it's not much different than any of the other fish, honestly.
What would you say the minimum size tank is that you should have for an Anthias?
Again, depending on the species, obviously you're not going to put a square spot Anthias in a 20-gallon tank. They get way too big, way too fast. At a minimum, probably a 40-gallon tank, and that really depends on how many Anthias you plan on keeping in there. The appeal of Anthias, like Chromis, is you can keep these fish in groups, and it's nice to see these big schools swimming around and behaving somewhat naturally in a captive environment. I usually recommend, when people are asking, well, how many Anthias should I get? Should I just get one? Should I get two? Should I get three? I typically recommend purchasing 4 or more, and it's not to sell additional fish. There's a hierarchy that has to be established, and until it does, there's usually quite a bit of aggression. So having more fish in that school helps to disperse some of that aggression until the hierarchy has been established. And you could always add additional females to the group afterwards. And then you've always got that subdominant female who's just waiting for that male to croak so she could take its place. It's just the way it works. But in general, for that natural effect, it's nice to see schools of Anthias.
Yeah, I love them. Blue Reef is asking why fatheads are hard to find and got expensive. So, well, yeah, I guess any reason for that?
A lot of stuff tends to be highly seasonal, and it's not even that the fish themselves are only available at a certain time of year. You got to take the fact that there are divers that have to get into the water to collect these fish, and certain times of the year, collecting sites may be inaccessible for one reason or another. We're starting to see the sunburst Anthias again. We actually have some due to arrive tomorrow, so they'll be popping up on the website shortly. This is about the time of year we start to see them in numbers. We should start to see things like Ventralis Anthias again soon. Your mass swallowtail angels should start popping up again as well. But just this past year in general, it's kind of been a crapshoot getting fish. COVID has affected a whole lot, aside from freight costs and people's ability to actually get out there and collect. And it's been challenging.
So you mentioned Ventralis Anthias. I tried those years and years ago, and I did not have any luck. Those things are gorgeous. They are gorgeous fish, but they have a reputation for being really, really difficult to keep. Do you guys have any secrets in terms of, obviously you put them through that pretty stringent quarantine process, but is that once they make it through that, are the chances of survival in the home aquarium going to be much greater versus getting them from somebody that is not going to have such a rigorous quarantining process?
Certainly if you're starting off with a quarantine condition specimen, you're going to be better off. Ventralis are notoriously aggressive with one another. The longest we've been able to keep them successfully is in numbers. Groups of 20 or 30 or more.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. When we
that's going to be pretty costly.
Yeah. So I'll send you a bill, and we'll get to work on it.
What does a Ventralis go for these days?
Previously they were retailing at probably $300 a piece.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're even going to go for this year. I haven't seen any available yet.
Yeah.
They're pricey. But yeah, that's a species that if you want to keep successfully keeping them, keep one or keep them in numbers because they do beat the hell out of each other.
Huh, interesting. And it doesn't matter in terms of male, female. They'll just they're not picky that way. They'll just.
Yeah, I mean the male is usually okay, but again, there's always usually another female or two in the group, just waiting for him to go. Um, so
Yeah, that's harsh. Mother Nature is harsh.
yeah, women.
What about Purple Queen Anthias? They're really cool, and whenever I see them out there for sale, they're really cheap. And is that because they're just not hardy and I mean I don't want to say they're a throwaway fish, but are they a fish that should be kept in home aquarium?
Probably not. Those are one of the trickier species we deal with. The purple queens, Avanti, are pretty challenging as well. They just don't seem to take to prepared diets as well as some other species do. I mean, they're beautiful fish, certainly not as hardy as some of the other species.
Bourbonius Anthias. I dig those things. I've had at least one, years ago. But again, it's a pricey Anthias, and I'm assuming
Yeah.
that's because of how difficult it is to collect them because they're a deep water fish.
Deeper water, yeah. I mean, they're certainly pricey, and they get more expensive every year. Um, but they are tanks. Those fish are
Right, they're really really hardy.
relatively indestructible. But not really. And as far as Anthias go, it's not an Anthias that you're going to keep in schools. They tend to be a bit more, a bit more solitary, a bit more reclusive, and they do get pretty sizable pretty quickly.
Let's switch gears here, and if anybody else has any questions about Anthias, we'll go back to them. And for sure, if you guys folks have any questions specific to any fish, put it in the chat here. I'm gonna kind of keep rattling through my list here. Let's talk about butterfly fish, and I guess one thing we haven't really talked about is reef safe versus non-reef safe. I guess Anthias are all going to be reef safe fish, but butterfly fish are not going to be all reef safe fish. And in fact, there's not a lot of options for reef safe butterfly fish. But I did pick up 4 pyramid butterfly fish from you guys, and I love those fish because they'll school together, and I have not had any issues with them nipping at any corals. They seem to just kind of like swim in the middle of a water column, and I think they're really a neat, cool fish, but you don't see them a lot.
Yeah, they're hard to get, and it's a fish that's in high demand. I mean, if we listed a dozen of them on the website tonight, they'd be sold out by the end of the evening. So it's we can never get them in the numbers that we hope to. We like bringing them in. They tend to be really hardy. And, again, it's a reef safe butterfly, probably even more so than even a copper band. And it's nice to be able to again, it's another option for a reef safe schooling fish. They're pretty. They've got good personalities, but again, any fish has the ability to nip out a coral and do some damage here or there if it feels compelled to do so.
Any other butterfly fish besides the pyramids that you can have pretty good confidence of being able to keep in a mixed reef?
Other than the copper bands, I mean the marginalis, which is essentially Australian copper band butterfly. And it depends on what species of corals you're keeping. A lot of some of these corallivores, they're going after SPS, and there's no way around it unless you're keeping LPS. And then there are other butterflies who may be more inclined to pick at your LPS, things like your acans. There are butterflies that may find that your zoanthids taste like Skittles and have a field day on them. So you can try to select the species you're keeping of fish based on the species of corals you want to keep. But it seems to be everyone's preference to have somewhat of a mixed reef.
Yeah.
So people like to be less dominant, or they like their soft stuff, and that's cool. But kind of got to weigh your options and consider the livestock you're going to be bringing in.
Yep. So Reef the Sea Forever is asking, do pyramids jump? In my experience, I've never had one jump. I don't know if they're known as jumpers though.
Uh, anything can jump. So if this is, I remember, Austin gave a pretty good lecture on this too. But you should absolutely have a lid on your tank. Um, anything can jump. Clownfish will jump. It doesn't take much to spook these fish. They don't have to go very far from the surface of the water to the edge of your tank. The light coming on too quickly, somebody walking by the tank, just getting chased by a tank mate. Anything can jump.
Yeah, startle them. So Josh Muldoon has got a question. I don't know. Are you looking at the chat there, Matt? Because there's no friggin' way I'm able to pronounce this species of fish, but are the Janrandalia nigros fairy wrasse reef safe? I couldn't figure out the last part of that, but
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, in general, most fairy wrasses and flasher wrasses are reef safe.
So let's pivot. I saw somebody asking about mass swallowtail angelfish, Japanese mass swallowtail angelfish, and I think you did mention that they're going to probably be coming around again pretty soon. So that's one species that I've found of angelfish that are pretty reef safe because they like to swim in the middle of the water column, and they I mean, my experience is I've never really seen them picking anything. Maybe they'll pick at a rock here and there, but they're not coral nippers.
Yeah, in general, all the Genacanthus species, angels are probably among the most reef safe, more so than any of like the dwarf or pygmy angels. And again, there's always a chance that something is going to nip at a coral, but I would be more confident adding one of them to my reef tank than I would a flame angel or a coral beauty.
Bellis angels are similar, right? They're in that
Yeah.
same genus. Yep. So in terms of getting back to the Japanese mass swallowtail angelfish, I think you and I have talked about this. I love those fish. I think they're so cool. I think the male is beautiful.
Beautiful.
And
yeah.
I've never had any luck trying to convert a female to a male. I've always found it tough to find a male. Actually, I found it tough to find a pair, a male-female pair. So what I've been told is to get 3 females, and one of those females, the most aggressive one, will eventually turn male. Is that kind of like your best shot at getting a male masked swallowtail angelfish?
Yeah, if you can't get a male, multiple females are usually your best bet. It's still not a guarantee. They may be happy hanging out as females for a very long time, but generally speaking, a larger number of females in the group is going to increase your chance that one of them is going to decide it wants to change to a male.
Yeah, my last attempt to do that, I put 3 females in, and the most aggressive one killed one of the females, and then the second one just eventually, didn't make it. So now I still have the one female who is I love the fish, but the experiment didn't work. Would I be able to add 2 females to that tank? It's a 187-gallon tank, or is that just asking for trouble?
I mean, it could really go. It could go either way. I'd love to be able to say, yeah, to throw them in there and it'll work out perfectly. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You may get a pair and they may want nothing to do with the third one in the group, so you're going to have to then work on getting that fish out of there. So depends on how much of a headache you want to have to deal with.
Yeah, it is always, kind of like a roll of dice no matter what you're talking about. And with angelfish, that's the case. You mentioned flame angels, and I know a lot of folks, have had success keeping flame angels in their mixed reefs with SPS and all that sort of thing. And I think some are not as concerned about polyp extension on SPS corals. So I think that's always a risk with an angelfish, is that they're going to kind of pick and what have you. So I guess the question is, can can the SPS still thrive if they're going to be picked at, or is it better to try these fish with an established reef versus having a whole bunch of frags in the tank?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly depends on, on the size of the coral, in general. Again, if you've got a system and you've got five half-inch frags in there, they're not going to be able to tolerate, constant picking. If it's a much larger, healthy colony, an occasional nip here and there is really not going to phase it. And it depends how quickly the corals in your reef are growing. If they're more prolific, then they stand a better chance of being able to take some nipping here and there, again, versus these little pieces.
So let's talk about Regal angelfish. That is my favorite angelfish. That is my holy grail fish. Well, let me be more specific. My holy grail fish is a misbarred Regal angelfish, and I found one from another hobbyist that I picked up for the new tank, and it survived my disaster, which was like, wow, that was huge, because I was freaking out during that time. So I didn't want to add that fish to a young tank with frags in it, because I was concerned that it's gonna be more prone to picking on and killing corals that are not that established versus colonies. But I felt like it was such a rare thing to be able to find that, especially from another hobbyist that had great luck with it. And plus, that person told me that it never picked on anything, including zoanthids, which really shocked me, because I think if you have zoas in your tank and you've got a Regal angelfish, then you can pretty much say goodbye to those things.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these angels are feeding on sponges in the wild, not necessarily targeting corals. So they're not. I mean, you see a lot of people throwing a lot of questionable angelfish and butterflies into well-established reef tanks, and it works out okay for them. Feeding certainly helps. If the fish are well fed, they're going to be less inclined to start looking for other avenues, to satiate themselves.
So I see Alex Correa is joining us there. Alex, thanks for joining us there, and he's got a question about a specific species of fish. And Matt, I'm going to direct you to the chat, because again, I'm not going to be able to pronounce the species of fish that he's asking about here. So it would be great to hear from you about the begins with a P, Hepatus. They have a tendency to develop head and lateral line erosion. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you know what he's talking about?
I'm not seeing it there. As far as head and lateral line goes, whether we're talking about tangs, is that what it was? Paracanthus hepatus?
I think that's what he's talking about.
Yeah. So it's a hippo tang.
Hippo tang. Okay. Alex, use the general terminology for me, because there's no way I'm gonna. It's going way over my head, all the scientific stuff. So
yeah, I wouldn't say that hippos are any more or less likely to get head and lateral line erosion than any other tang. And there are a lot of ideas as to why this happens. It's been linked to copper exposure, poor water quality, poor nutrition, carbon dust. We'll see a lot of fish and stress in general. So with all those things thrown at you, how do you know what's the cause and how do you fix it? We will tend to see a lot of head and lateral line develop during the course of the quarantine, whether it's the stress of the environment or it is the exposure to copper. What we find is that after the quarantine, when the fish are back in clean salt water, they've got more space to move around in, they're overall, they're in a better environment, and they're still getting good nutrition, it does tend to resolve pretty quickly. We've seen fish that have had pretty severe head and lateral line erosion almost completely resolve itself in 2 or 3 weeks, just after being moved out to that main. So it is reversible to an extent.
What about I've got a purple tang that has got some fin rot. Is that something that can be treated if I was able to fish that, fish out of the tank? Is that something that that fish would have to be in a little quarantine tank and receive medication, or is there something that can potentially help that quick fix?
Depends what the cause is. Are you dealing with a parasite? Is it getting nipped at by other fish? Is it chronic? What are you seeing in that respect?
It's not getting nipped at other fish. It's losing its fins along the dorsal and also underneath the
Uh-huh.
body there. So it's kind of it's like a pattern in terms of what it's losing.
Yeah.
In terms of the fins.
And it may have something bacterial going on. It may be worth trying to pull them out of there and doing an antibiotic bath.
Just wanted to thank VeggieTADT for that super chat. I really appreciate the comment. Is love TSM. The only place I get fish. Customer service is excellent. And John Reef of Vermont is seconding that comment. Says that's the only place he's going to buy fish for me. What else are we looking at here in terms of the chat? What else did I want to? Just a reminder, folks. If you want to, we're at about 10 after the hour. Matt, I want to be respectful of your time and not keep you longer than you want to be on the stream for. So give me the high sign if you need to make an exit stage left.
It's your show. I'm cool to hang out for a little while.
Okay, gotcha. So, Wrasses. Let's talk about Wrasses. You've got reef safe and you've got not reef safe. You've got some that you keep within a sand, in sand beds. I think most Wrasses like a sand bed. What are your thoughts about keeping a Wrasse in a bare bottom tank, but having a little bowl or container of sand in the back for that Wrasse? Is that something that's going to, stress that Wrasse out eventually? Is that something that is okay to do, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's not a bad idea if you're trying to provide things like leopard wrasses or any of those other wrasses that are going to dive into the sand to sleep. Um, it's nice to provide it for them. Obviously, that substrate is going to get kicked out of whatever bin you put it in. So if you're going to if you've got this bare bottom tank and it's pristine, if it's going to upset you to start seeing all this substrate blowing around on a daily basis, you might not want to go that route. But again, if you're trying to offer these wrasses a natural place to sleep, not a bad idea. But wrasses they'll do okay even without that sand bed.
I have a Chaeto leopard wrasse in my 187 gallon tank. Really cool fish, a hard fish to find, and it was not eating probably for the first 2 or 3 weeks that I had it. But I think I had a pretty good pod population in my tank. Is that something for that particular leopard wrasse you really need to have an established tank and a good pod population for it to do well?
Yeah. I mean, if that fish is not coming to you already on a prepared diet, then yes, certainly, live foods make a great option. And those things they're going to forage naturally their entire life. So you might as well, give them some pods to feed on.
Is that a fish that you guys get in every now and then? I just don't see those available for sale. I mean, it's
Yeah, we haven't seen them a lot recently. We were getting them, for a good stretch of time. We haven't brought any in it's probably been about a year.
Oh well, and they're not cheap either, right?
No, that's another pricier fish. You're probably looking at upwards of $300.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, it is a gorgeous fish, and if you get a healthy one that's eating, then it's so well worth it. I mean, you talked about putting covers on your on your tanks. You recommend it for fish jumping out. I'm not I don't like the look of a cover, and so I don't use them. I actually bought a cover for the tank and I didn't put it on. But my Chaeto leopard wrasse has jumped out 2 times.
I'm sure it has.
And I thought after the first time it was going to learn and not do it again. So that's why I bought the cover, and then I'm like, nah, he's not going to jump again. But the first time I found him on the floor, he was actually dried up a little bit, and I put it in the tank, and it survived. And then it jumped again when I was down in the room. So I saw it, and I put it right back in the tank, and yeah, knock on wood, it hasn't jumped. Yeah, haven't jumped the third time.
They have no idea that when they jump out of the water, they're not going to land right back in it. Your carpet is not something that was, in the back of their mind when they took that leap.
But it landed on like tile. How does it survive tile?
Yeah, you'd be amazed. You think that's like falling off the 10th floor of a skyscraper or something. They can take a beating. Not that that's ideal.
So let's talk about tangs, and yellow tangs now have become very expensive because of the ban on Hawaii. What are you guys seeing in terms of that ban on fish that are from Hawaii? Is that impacted things in terms of what you guys are selling, and do you see any hope of that ban being reversed?
I have no faith that it's gonna happen anytime soon. We're not betting on it. It would be nice if it did, only because that was one of the most well managed fisheries on the planet. And to think that could get shut down so quickly it's scary for the hobby. We got what we could before the shutdown. And that's, once these fish are gone, they're gone until they start, increasing captive breeding. Biota hasn't released any more yellow tangs since their last available batch back in January. They can only keep up with so much demand. It's only going to put more pressure on them, to keep cranking these things out without the wild, counterpart. And they can't force these fish to breed any faster than they're going to. So you're definitely going to see even the price of the captive bred yellow tangs is going to increase. How much, I don't know. But it's going up.
Same with the yellow eye cold tangs. Is that fish is pretty pricey right now, right?
Yeah, any of the Hawaiian endemics or the fish that were even making their way from other areas through the Hawaiian Islands, coming to a collector or distributor there. Stuff's not necessarily flowing like it was. There are species you're not going to see once these flame wrasses are gone, unless Hawaii opens back up. You're not going to see flame wrasses anymore. They're not. No one's successfully captive bred them, to my knowledge. And with those guys, it's the females want to turn male almost as quickly as they can. They're a challenge. So I don't, like I said, short of Hawaii opening back up, whatever flame wrasses are on the market right now, it's a fish you got to have. You might as well get it now because it's gone. Potter's angels. You're not going to see Potter's angels anymore until they start captive breeding them. The last group of Potter's angels that we got, after we got them through quarantine, some of them actually went back to Hawaii to become part of some captive breeding projects out there. Cool. And there was another group that we sent out. A couple larger batches of Potter's angels went out to hobbyists and industry professionals who were hoping to have success breeding them, and I hope they do. It's an underrated angel. They're beautiful, and you don't have one now, you're not getting one.
Farmer, yeah, I think you answered Josh Muldoon's question about the flame wrasses being available these days, and he's also saying that yellow tangs are now the same wholesale price as gem tangs in Europe. Who would have thought?
Yeah, it sounds about right.
One more question I have for you about, two more questions. If you wanted to put a bunch of yellow tangs in a tank together, is the best way to do it at the same time? Or Any species of
Yeah.
tangs?
Same time is always best. Typically you're going to add, if you're not adding them at the same time, you're starting with the smaller species first or the smaller tangs first and adding the larger tangs later. Um, but yeah, the general rule of thumb is to try to get them in there at the same time. Use food to distract them, turn the lights off, when they're getting aggressive with one another. It's bound to happen. You're not going to take three pristine yellow tangs, throw them in a tank together, and not have someone get nipped, at least initially.
Is there one species of tang that is a lot more aggressive than other species of tangs? Because I had a powder blue tang once in my tank that it was probably like one of the last fish that I added to the tank, and I'm pretty sure I had some other tangs in that tank. But this thing turned evil. After a while, it just like took over the tank, and any fish I put in that tank, not a tang, any kind of fish, it like blew up on the new additions, and I eventually had to get rid of that powder blue, and I have not tried another powder blue tang. I mean, is that kind of a typical experience with a powder blue tang? Are they known to be that aggressive?
Some of them can get very aggressive. Others again can be model citizens. They're all a little bit different. Sohal tangs. I don't know that I've ever met a passive Sohal tang. They tend to be pretty aggressive from the time they're 2 inches until the time they're a foot. That's a fish with an attitude, and they'll get to a point where they're so big they don't have to worry about anything else. But yeah, it's always a gamble. No two fish are exactly the same.
So, man, I think we're gonna wrap things up here tonight. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with us before we sign off on the live stream?
No, just thank you for having me and for the opportunity to get to talk to you and your guests.
Yeah, no, I think you guys are absolutely worth checking out. Like I said at the beginning of the show, it just seems like there's a dearth of quality online retailers to buy fish from, and I did kind of like a lot of homework myself to find you guys. I had a great experience, and I'm looking forward to using you in the future. So I think the whole quarantining, the comprehensive quarantining process is very, very important. And I know a lot of folks at home, like myself, don't have quarantine tanks set up for fish. So the fact that you can be comfortable ordering fish from you guys and not have to worry about that, to me, is a big plus.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to grab them from anybody else on the internet, yeah, at the very least, get them from somebody who's doing at least some type of quarantine in the meantime. Last thing you want to do is introduce velvet or crypt to your system for a bad case of urinema.
All right, man. Well, Matt, thanks again for being a guest on the show. I want to pass along my sincere thanks to you for taking the time for being with us, and I also want to thank everybody for tuning in and enjoyed the chat there. And if you have any other questions for Matt, you could just drop them in the comments, and I'm sure he'll be checking back in terms of the live stream. I also want to thank Marine Depot for being the sponsor of the and supporting the show. Please keep them in mind when you are shopping for your tank. So thanks again, and my next live stream will be next Thursday, April 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Scott Fellman. So a lot of you folks might remember Scott from his days at Unique Corals. Well, today he is at TSM Aquatics doing some really cool things. So we're going to have him on the show next week and talk with him to see what he's up to. Anyway, until then, be safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Later.